I am coming to the very realistic conclusion that I hate computers. How about you?
For years. Years.
Right.
Ah,
So I have an idea for today, and
yeah.
this is I've set recording starting. So seeing as there isn't a responsible adult in the room because Christa isn't here, I thought we could go a bit freeform and go down that route. So in her fabulous methodology, she does an introduction at the beginning, so I'll crack on with that, which is welcome to the Forensic Focus podcast. We are your hosts today. Krista's not with us. She's off doing exciting things at DFRWS in the US. And he is also going to take a bit of leave after that, which is well deserved. She's an incredibly hardworking lady. So Alex and I are here to shoot the breeze today without adult supervision, and
Mm.
we're going to crack on.
Which
Um,
just means no script for us, really.
no scripts, no topics, no
No.
clue what we're going to talk about, but I'm excited. Um, One thing I did notice is that for any listeners that weren't aware, apparently we're on Spotify,
Ooh.
which I had no idea about. That was a comment from LinkedIn about our introduction, which came out sort of on Monday this week for us. And by the time you listen to this podcast in future, if you're listening to it, probably about 4 or 5 weeks ago, um, because we have
Yeah, we
a
got we did get told to make evergreen content. So this could appear now between now and like 2040 maybe.
yeah. By the way, we're your new co-hosts. Yes. So if you've not met us before, so yeah, we're on Spotify, and somebody has actually subscribed to the Forensic Focus podcast. So we have at least one listener, and that's great. Apart from us or you and Krista listening back to it, because I refuse to hear my own voice played back in my headphones.
Yeah, I think if there's definitely a listen count, it's just me re-listening to podcasts being kind of cringing at my own voice and picking up errors that I make all the time. Which Krista has promised that she will try and edit out more, which I'm very thankful for.
Yes,
Which will be
yes,
great.
yeah. So she's going to love this. I'm slightly nervous because I went into court on one occasion, and I was scheduled to give evidence. I didn't in the end.
Mm.
And the prosecution barrister came up to me and he goes, "Oh, Mr. Biles, it's really great to see you. I've been watching the videos of you on YouTube, and I'm really interested to get you in the stand." And I'm like, "Fuck, what? Sorry, that'll probably be bleeped out, by the way. What did I say? What was it that I'd said that he was so interested to cross-examine me about?" And occasionally I've been perhaps slightly more um, critical of the prosecution cases than I should have been, perhaps. Uh, in some conversations I've had, I know I've cherry picked the worst ones to talk about because that's what's entertaining.
Mm.
But yeah, so I have a slight fear of the future of things that I may say on this podcast coming back to haunt me on the witness stand. So
Yeah, and it's always a bit of like a roller coaster ride because I have the similar feeling like whenever you get up to do a presentation, you know you haven't prepared well enough for it, and you're doing it, and you're like, oh, this is the worst presentation that I have ever done in my life. And then it finishes, and you have that endorphin release of thank God that's over. And then you either get your marks back if it would as an assessment, or you rewatch it back or re-listen like I do in the podcast. And I'm just like, what was I on back then? Like, did I just have three shots before I started that and thought that that was a good idea? But yeah, we'll see on this one.
we'll see on this one. So
Yeah.
I mean, in the day to day for you as a incident response, how much interaction do you end up doing into the giving presentations to end
So
customers?
yeah, so I guess because I've shifted away from I guess incident response a little bit. Um, when I was incident response, it was quite a lot. So it took up huge amounts of my time to investigate and collect all the evidence. But then the presentations were like it's different from when you're in university or like you think back to school and you think back to public speaking and you have this fear of just having to do a public speech every year when you're at school. Whereas when you're in the technical field and you're doing it you kind of don't have that fear because you're so intimate with the knowledge of
Mm,
what you've just looked at. So, and you get to a point where no one can kind of question that. And if they do, it is a really good question. And you're like, okay, I forgot to mention that, but here's the evidence that I haven't, and here's what I have for you. But it doesn't feel like it's public speaking anymore. It doesn't feel like it's a presentation because you've lived that for the last 2 weeks, and you get to it and you're like, okay, I can't stop telling you about all the stuff that I want to tell you about, kind of thing. So um, I've definitely shifted away from that. So I've shifted my focus, I guess, presentation wise, to more training delivery. So um, the the stuff that I do now, I try and create training content. I try and record it, and it takes me way too long to record it because I kind of will listen back to myself or watch back, and I'm like, oh, that was terrible, and I have to re-record that piece. And I've learnt tricks over time to make sure I can have content that I can cut and replace really easily. So the best way to do that is not to video record yourself. So hot tip for anyone who wants to record training material: voice is so much easier to edit than video content. Yeah.
I've heard that and I'm not good at this, and you know, you guys listening back and probably picking up on this more, but you need to be really careful not to run your words together so that you can go in and cut
Mhm.
sentences in the right places to make it work. Um, do you when you're recording, do you have a screen reader? You know what I mean? Prompt or auto cue. That's the word I'm looking
I
for.
I do. So it depends on the content. If it's like me trying to tell facts, or I'm trying to get across a very complex argument or complex procedure, I will have like not a screen reader, but just like a Word document. Again, because for my training materials, I don't record my image, so it's just the whatever I'm training on and my voice. So I don't have to worry about not looking at the camera or like looking off to the side, that kind of thing. Um, but then if I'm kind of demoing content, it's the easier version of a live demo. So you can kind of make mistakes, and when you do make mistakes, I kind of pause if I make a mistake and make sure I'm quiet while I'm figuring it out. Because when I'm editing, it's very easy to see where I've gone quiet because there's no jumping in the sound when I'm editing. So it's very easy to go back to that point and go, oh, I'm back here. Whereas I used to talk a lot to myself while I was trying to troubleshoot. And that was just like, I was like, oh, I don't know where. I can understand why they use those clappy things in movies. I don't know what they're called, but you know, they come in and they like go,
Yeah,
and that sound bite is for them to like, this is where we cut.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I
The
almost need a
film.
mini one of those or a maraca. I could use one of them.
Yeah. Next one we do with Christa, I'm bringing a maraca. That's it.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
she has the
But
editing points, so I'll just sit here and shake a maraca occasionally.
but what about
No,
yourself? Like you used to well, I'm not sure whether you still do teach, but I know you
I'm
used
not
to teach at
not
least.
not at the moment. I'm hoping to go back into teaching in another university placement in 6 months to 12 months time, depending upon
Hmm.
how things work out there. Um, no, I mean I taught live in front of a studio audience. Although I have to say, I mean, there was huge issues for me over COVID. I used to go along to Warwick in near Coventry in England, stand up in
Mm.
front of a class and talk to them, and you can see a little bit at least when people are looking confused, or you can see that what you're talking about is sinking in.
Yeah.
And then we went into COVID, and the university wasn't enforcing the idea that they had cameras on. So you were
Mm.
talking to, at best, my first year class had, they'd all decided that they were going to have avatars of frogs. So all of their teams' images were of different frogs, which was great and great fun. And they persuaded me to change mine. So my university avatar for the entirety of the COVID season was a frog sitting on a log. Anyway, but
I
still, you
think
get.
just quickly talking about rebranding, I have a perfect image for this episode, and it's going to be so we're set talking about frogs. And it
Okay.
just needs to, we need to release this on a Wednesday for this to work.
All right. Okay. I'm sure they can be arranged. We'll talk. We'll talk to the powers that be.
Yeah.
um, and I'm going to say it, but at worst, it was just those, the standard teams
Yeah.
set of initials, and you would sit here, and we did, the way the lectures were done is that we were giving 3 hours.
Mm.
Okay, we break it up with exercises in the middle of that, but you're sitting here. I'm sitting here like I'm talking to you, and there's a conversation. I was sitting here just
Yeah.
talking and talking and talking to emptiness, with no feedback, no understanding of whether they're getting it or not, whether they're even there. Um, Occasionally I would try and get interaction, and you could tell the usual suspects. The people who were there, were paying attention, were the ones that always responded when you said, can somebody let me know
Mm.
that you can hear me, even, and you
Yeah.
get that. And it's a bit of a shame, but in sort of in the last sessions of teaching, it was back in the lab, and it was great. It was really nice, and it was there. But no, I don't script. I tend to have slides which give me a good sort of overview of where I'm supposed to be, the material I'm supposed to be covering in a session.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
because obviously we address it on a topic by topic basis. The thing is, though, is that I tend to do them out of order in my head, because the slides are behind you, and
Yeah,
I'll
right.
start
Yeah.
talking, and I can say I'm a terrible pacer. I can't sit still. You can probably tell. I keep moving here. It's just I'm a fidget. But
Mm.
when I'm talking, it's great fun, because I've got not a Fitbit, it's a Garmin watch, that tracks my steps, and I can tell the days that I've been lecturing, because my step count quadruples on a given day, because I just pace up and forth across the lab in front of the students and keep walking backwards and forwards. But
Yeah.
it means inevitably, when I need to change slide, I'm on the opposite side of the room from the space bar on the computer to walk back over and press it. And also, I can't see what the next slide is, and all of that fancy stuff. So I usually talk, and then I go either, oh, we'll talk about it in a minute, and the slide comes up in about 15 slides time, and
Mm.
or I've covered off the things when I get to a slide and go, oh yeah, we've talked about that already, and just sort of skip through 6 slides, like that. I like doing it this way. I mean, on the one hand, it means that it's kind of less preparation work. So there's not the sitting down and writing a script and being prepared in that regard. But actually, I heard an amazing and a truly amazing public speaker, a guy who he talked on technology, history of technology, in fact, and it was fascinating. And he was so slick and so good, and I listened to him and I thought, I really, really want to be like that. I really want to get to that stage of being that good.
Mm.
And then I heard him talk again, and he said word for word exactly the same thing. He gave the same speech more than once to different audiences.
Mm.
And on the one hand, it was a great speech and all of that, but I realized that actually, and with due respect, when the guy's he's an expert in his field, but he was a one-trick pony when it came to public speaking.
Mm.
It was like that. But I was really excited to hear what his new lecture was going to be. And although the title had changed to fit the audience and the event, the content was 95% the same. There was only 5% that had actually been edited.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I found that hugely disappointing. Whereas I think the way that I like to do it involves, okay, arguably making it up on the spot. I'm better prepared in court than this, I hasten to add. But for lecturing, you're live, you're there, you're interacting, and you're listening to the feedback of the audience, whether that's visual confusion in what's coming to you or actual genuine questions, and then you tailor your message to who you're talking to. And I think that's a much more honest way of doing it. And I think certainly from a student perspective, there are maybe students who are listening to this who wish to disagree, but I think that it's a more practical learning experience for them. They get to hear something that is more tailored to them. I know talking to my own children about their university experience, they are very unhappy when a lecturer stands there and reads off the slides when they might as well have just sat at
Yeah.
home and read the slides themselves, and
Yeah.
they've gained
Yeah.
no additional information. Yeah, I go off on a tangent. Yes, I'll talk about something different, or follow off on a question, and maybe we wouldn't cover all the material we're supposed to in that given lecture, and we move it around between different lectures or whatever.
Mm.
But actually there is an interaction that happens there which doesn't happen if you're just reading from slides.
Mm.
And given that, certainly for me learning, I need to be able to interact with the material. I'm going to assume the same of my students. So
Yeah, I suppose like in that scenario, like was that guy a lecturer as well, like at a university, or was it just
yes,
kind
yeah,
of like
yeah,
a
yeah. No, he
yeah,
was a senior lecturer. Yeah,
yeah, okay, yeah? Because I guess like it also depends on your audience and how the material is delivered. Because universities, I would say, are definitely meant to be more collaborative
mm.
between the students and the lecturers, and that should be more of a natural conversation almost, particularly for your more senior years as you're
Yeah,
going through uni. Like first year, you can kind of imagine the lecturers would probably just have the same content. And I know like I had a lecturer in first year and I was always laughing. Like he always had such great jokes. And then I was a in my third year, I was a tutor for the class, and I was like just in the lecture, and it was the I just remember it was like very similar, but he told all the same jokes, and I was like, oh, okay, he just must get a kick out of this that he can get a laugh every single year from telling like the same 100 jokes over a semester because he has a new audience every time. So or unless someone fails and has to resit the course, I'm sure. And then they're probably sitting there going, oh, I
oh
hate
my
this.
god, yeah.
I will never fail. I will never fail another course in my life because of this.
I had
Um,
my issue is that I have at one point I was teaching a master's course on forensics and a third year undergraduate course on incident response and forensics, pretty much simultaneously. Um, and I just got confused about what I'd told each class, because there was the material, which was one thing, and I knew where we were in the lectures, and then I was like, this story happened, and I started talking about it, and I was like, did I tell the third years that, or did I tell the master's students that? And I was sort of like asking people, did I say this before? I remember saying it, but was it to you? You know. So yeah,
yeah.
I have sympathy for that. I think there's a bit of an issue of I don't know. It's an interesting question. Actually, it's how many jokes does one person actually know anyway? You know,
Yeah,
I
probably
probably have a
many.
repertoire of about 100 jokes, if that, that I would roll out to people who I thought were a new audience. Yeah.
Yeah, I do get it. Like when you're presenting, I find it an interesting thing in incident response and in the cyber industry when you have so much of your work was half remote, and then the pandemic happened and we kind of switched to fully remote. And the different cultures from, particularly when you work for an IR company or a vendor from outside other organizations, what their cultures are like with cameras. Because I always, especially coming from the outside, like I always come on with my camera on.
Mm.
And that's just something that I've always done. Like I picked it up at the last place I worked at. I think it's a level of etiquette and it's a level of you're engaged, particularly for someone who's had an incident. It shows that you're invested in their situation at the moment. Um, and then sometimes like people would then be like, oh, okay, I'm gonna either turn my camera on, or they'll be like, oh, my place is a mess at the moment. Like we've just had an incident. I'm sorry. Like, but then later on they'll turn on their cameras, and it's very like even this. Like I think body language is very hard to read just over camera, and I find job interviews really weird, like over Zoom and Teams these days, because you can't read your interviewers, or if you have multiple ones, like the person who's talking gets highlighted and they're the big image, but then anyone who's in the background kind of gets shifted into smaller images. So it's hard to read the
Yeah.
room's body language when you're there. Um, so yeah, it's and then it's horrible. Like I always find it horrible when people like all the people have their cameras off and I'm just the only one. And I'm like, are you guys judging me? Like, what's happening? I can't tell whether you're engaged. Like, did you just hear what I said? Are you trying to talk or you're on mute? Because I can't tell you because I can't see your mouth moving, kind
Yeah,
of thing. So that's always super difficult to deal with, I think.
yeah, yeah. I think I'm trying to think what my default is actually. I think generally speaking, yeah, if I'm going to deal with a customer and or a potential or a colleague,
Mm.
the camera is on generally on. Um, I think there have been sort of some I did some slightly larger project work in security during the pandemic. Um, and there were again 20, 30 people sitting around the virtual table. Um,
Yeah.
and
When it's
and
cast of thousands, it's different, I think.
yeah, and I was definitely turning my camera off for that. But actually, part of it was to save the bandwidth because
Mm.
um, my son, my wife, were both working here, also doing Teams meetings. And
Mm.
to be honest, when you're saying nothing and just sitting and listening, there's no point in saturating the
Mm.
link when they were actually relevantly using their cameras and being engaged more. Um, the one that got to me is that obviously you and I we're using Zoom at the moment. I mean, I use Teams, but the blur the background so that you can't see the mess behind me is fabulous. I've given evidence in court using their systems, and you can't blur the backgrounds. So
Ah,
I have a pop-up photographic screen. It's not a green screen.
nice.
It doesn't actually do a green screen, but it's a sort of a neutral
Yeah.
background that will sort of come up and fit behind me. And I was angling the camera, so all you could see was this me sitting in front of basically a studio backdrop. So that was quite
Mm.
a good one. But I see now that they print ones that look like bookcases so that you can put yourself in front of what appears to be an intelligent bookcase, as opposed to
All right. Yeah,
yeah.
I didn't even think that's like a good opportunity to come for some people out of the pandemic, I guess, to make some money by printing these backgrounds and selling them. Because
Uh,
I'm sure they wouldn't be cheap for such large prints.
no, 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 not at all. I mean, even the
Yeah.
plain one was 100 and something pounds.
Yeah.
So yeah, my son bought a green screen blanket at one point um, because I'm going to say it was something like 12 quid off Amazon or whatever it was. It wasn't
Mm.
expensive, but they were doing sort of the staff team building stuff. They had a drinks evening or whatever, and it was supposed to be sort of fancy dress. It must have been sort of Halloween or whatever. I mean, he just sort of draped this green screen blanket around his shoulders and just went as a disembodied head for the entirety of this, which I thought was genius.
When is a formal head?
Yeah. So
It's cool.
yeah, I like that. But yeah, how are we doing for time? Because that's right, we're still good, plenty of time. So in terms of creating your presentation materials, are you what are you using? Are you using any particular tools, or is it just sort of open source stuff? Or
Ooh, good question. Yeah. I try and use the easiest tools ever, so I don't have to have a high learning curve. So to record, I use
yeah,
OBS.
yeah,
For that, I use I think it's called. Let me have a quick look. XSplit Cam, XSplit V Cam, which when I watched some YouTube videos on people recommending programs to use to record training materials or stream and that. And I was on my work laptop doing this, and this lady was giving all this advice, and she said, use XSplit VCam. And I was like, that sounds like a porn website. And then I was very worried Googling that. And it was only because I saw her use it and it had it in the title. And then I was like, for sure, I'm going to Google this and porn will come up just because of the internet. Uh, I didn't look past page one of Google, but it was all that program. So I think I'm safe. Um, the other program that I use to then edit is VideoPad Video Editor. So I ended up, that's the one thing that I did purchase. So it was fairly cheap. I think it was 40 something dollars, maybe about $50. Um, but that just enabled me to export with no limit to size.
Right.
Because I was running into that issue where it was wanting me to keep videos for the free version under, I think, like 12 minutes. But some of them with examples and training stuff, like I think the longest video I've done for training is about 48 minutes after all the cuts. Yeah, like pretty simple 3 programs, and I cut in like a title slide and an exit slide, and I went and found some like royalty-free music, and I have like a little intro music that just fades into me talking. I finished it and I was like, I feel like a little kid doing a like a macrame art piece, and I kind of take it to my boss and I'm like, look what I did. And he's just like, this is amazing. Like this is so good. He was just like, can we share this with customers? And I was like, yeah, like it's kind of for them. Like I don't think, because we have like a professional marketing team for the company that I work for. And they're like, we've recently done a whole marketing campaign and it's all professionally done and it looks amazing. And then I'm there just making these little training videos, and he's just like, no, it's fine. Like it's just going to their internal IR teams. It'll be great for them. Because it like the content itself is good. Like
Yeah.
it's teaching them how to use things and what to look for. Yeah, it was funny until I started getting some feedback. And then yeah, like feedback's an interesting thing. Like I always am quite critical of myself when I create stuff, but then when you ask people for feedback, it's hard to get, I think it's hard to get honest feedback from people in terms of whether or not they engage with it enough to give you enough feedback, or maybe they don't, because they don't understand the process. They're not well equipped to give you feedback, and or maybe they feel like they're going to hurt your feelings. Whereas
Yeah.
when you kind of just like, no, like I really need you to tell me what I'm doing wrong, or tell me what you think I could do better, which will just help. So yeah, I always try and listen back to and be as critical as I can. And then I don't worry too much at the time. I'm like, I just need to put this out. It's fine. Like I'll just improve over time, because
Mm.
it's a learned skill doing these kind of things. So yeah, it's interesting. It's hard. I think it's the hardest thing to do other than doing public speaking on a topic you're not that interested in, talking to no one,
Yeah.
because there's no, like you said, like there's no feedback. There's no kind of, if you are trying to be funny or you're trying to be entertaining, even though
We need
it's,
to get a laugh track for this podcast, by the way.
oh yeah, that would be, well, no, we just need to edit it in. We need to pause and wait for laughter when I say a funny joke, or when I say a joke that I think's funny,
Yeah.
and then we just have the laugh track over the top.
Yeah. I like it. We'll get
Yeah.
that along with the beeping out the rude things that I shouldn't say.
Well,
Um,
I was thinking, instead of beeping out, we have like our forensics focused podcast, and then we have the forensics focused Australian edition, which has no beeps. So there's it'll be fine down here.
yeah. Yeah.
If anything, we need to insert more swear words just for the Australian version.
Oh, I can do that. I find myself. I actually had to. So obviously, guidance in university has changed a little bit over the last few years, and we're supposed to do things like trigger warnings for certain things if we're talking about them, which in forensics is astonishingly often.
Mm.
But I actually, I've given up, and I start off the year by going, right. Is there anybody who is massively offended or has any religious? I work with somebody who's deeply religious, and he was, seriously objected on religious grounds to swearing. And hey,
Okay.
Z, hope all's going well. And I completely, I made a big effort not to do it around him, but I sort of, I stood up at the front of the class and asked them if it was okay if I swore throughout the year, and they were all fine with it. So off the filters came, and I just carried on as usual. So that was great. But having said that, I stood up in front of I was giving a talk in front of a bunch of barristers.
Mm.
I can't remember exactly what it was that I said. I misread a line, and I swore out loud, and I realized what I'd done, and I went, "Oh shit! I just swore." And the entire room
Dig
just
yourself more of a hole.
yeah, and yeah, they found it funny, so that was a fortunate thing. We'll see if Christa cuts that and beeps that one out. We'll leave it in for the Australian version.
Oh, we're just, yeah, this is what happens when we're unsupervised. We're just creating more work for Christa
Yeah.
to edit these before they go out.
Anyway, uh, we're running. I'm running short on time. I have to go and deal with another client, unfortunately. But you made a very good point, and as we close out the recording, I think feedback, please, ladies and gentlemen that are listening, as the audience, ladies, gentlemen, and people who identify as any other particular um, assignment, we would love to hear feedback, positive, negative, topics that you'd like us to talk about.
Mm.
Uh,
Whether or not we should include a laugh track.
I don't know which legally to laugh trap. If swearing is offensive, um,
Mm.
we would be genuinely delighted to hear from our one listener on Spotify what he thinks of this.
Yeah, shout out to Brennan. He was my old boss, so really good guy, and I'm glad he's following on Spotify.
So yeah, anyway, so looking at Krista's words, does she have? Thanks also to our listeners. You'll be able to find this recording and transcription along with more articles, information, and forums at www.forensicfocus.com. And in her words, stay safe and well. And
Thanks,
because I'm
everyone.
not going to kill the track on that, thanks, Alex. It's been really fun. Um,
Yeah, nice
Krista
to
should
just
be back
chill
in a
out.
week or two, and we'll actually have some sensible topics to talk about again.
Yeah, what one topic that I wanted to wait until all of us were back, which I think would be a great one, and leveraging your experience is chatting about uh, forensics and instant response courses, like both university and certifications, what we think about them. I think that'll be a
Yeah,
really interesting topic because you go to job fairs and it's like all students ever ask you about what certifications, what courses should I be doing to get into the industry.
yeah.
I think that would be great.
I think so, and it'd be interesting to hear what your personal experience of it is. I mean, I know, and I digress. I have my ISC squared CISSP
Mhm.
uh, bill dropped through the door. It's due to be paid, so it's on my mind at the moment as to whether I am gaining value from it or not.
Mm.
So it's an active thing in my mind as well. So yeah, it'd be really interesting to hear your thoughts on it, and your experience of what it is that you feel the value is, if there is a value. I don't know if you've seen. He says, digressing with the amount of time he has left.
It's all right. We got
I've got
six
a few
minutes.
minutes. Got 6 minutes. There's quite a big thing going on in the infosec world at the moment, on certainly on Twitter, which is not the be all and end all of things. But somebody wrote a paper, and a couple of people sort of popped up and critiqued it, and he turned around and said, "You aren't fit to critique this. You don't have a PhD." I was like, in this industry, that's not
Yeah.
actually, a prerequisite anymore in my mind for, you know,
In theoretical subjects in today's modern age of access to all information, is a PhD even needed in a lot of stuff if you can spend the time to research it?
yeah,
It's
yeah.
a yeah, it's a tough one. I feel like digressing just a little bit further, the education industry and the people who publish those papers are there running as a business. So it provides a paywall for them to make money. Because at
Mm.
least from what I know, a lot of the authors don't make much money if those papers are recited or accessed later on because it's just going to the company that's providing that service. So
Yeah.
and some papers are like $80 to just access, or you need a subscription to the library.
Yeah, I'm going to say that's one of the best things I have found about working for a university is the access to the library. In all
Mm,
seriousness, it's one
yeah.
of my favorite things. I've been able to go in and look up any ISO standard I want for free. I've been able to go in and look up
Yeah.
any academic paper I want, but also things like access to court records and previous court cases. As long as the university has a law school, there's usually access
Yeah.
through to some resources, which are tens and tens of thousands of pounds a year if you need to get to them through other means.
Yeah. Well, this is
So
why, like, for our industry, things like the SANS white paper, most big vendors put out their own white papers. So thinking like Mandiant, CrowdStrike,
yeah,
even who does Secure Labs? I forget who's behind those, but they also put it, or even just like really good articles that are
mm-hmm.
well researched, uh, well put together, so that even someone who's not familiar with the content can be across it. So, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's what I really like about cyber, is that it's fairly open in terms of there's no real paywalls, I don't think, to start reading about stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh well, it's a good topic. We'll save it for another day. Well, save
Yeah,
more of it for another day.
definitely, definitely.
And you take care, and I'll
You
speak
too.
to you soon. All right.
All
Cheers.
right.
Thanks everyone.
Catch up.
Ta-da.